where I was getting multiple sales a day, sometimes 10 to 12 sales in one day. That was probably a year into having Etsy. So I was already an established seller. I don't remember how many sales I had at the moment, but it was enough to know that I wasn't a fake Etsy account or that I wasn't a scammer. I had almost 5 stars, no complaints, and they decided to put a hold on my funds, which is something that they are allowed to do. However, when I was getting started, I did not know that that was something that they could do. I also never would have expected that they would put a hold on someone's account that's been selling for over a year.
So there's been a lot of Etsy sellers that have either been getting suspended or being banned, but there's a lot of sellers that are getting very upset. And in this case, I want to share with you how someone decided to close their Etsy shop after 3 years and hundreds of sales. Chris, I want to go ahead and watch this with you. I want to see your reaction as well. And I want to see what we can learn from this woman's experience.
I closed down my Etsy store last week after 3 years and 166 sales, and I want to talk about why. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Adriana. I've been running my handmade jewelry business for the last 3 years, and I started my business simultaneously on Etsy and Shopify.
Okay, so she's got a Shopify and an Etsy shop. So that's going to be interesting. I'm really curious to see how she did with Shopify. I'm going to assume she still has Shopify and she left Etsy. Let's see.
There are a lot of people who have successfully made their career on Etsy alone. That's honestly great. I wish that that was a viable route to go down for everyone, but there are some serious red flags with Etsy that I just couldn't ignore anymore, and I finally closed my store because of them. Etsy is a really good place to start whenever you're first getting started, but please don't just rely on Etsy. Everything's
very important, right, Chris? Like, don't rely on Etsy.
So I was hoping she was going to get there because she said, hey, a lot of people are making their entire business on Etsy. That's okay. That's not ideal, right? And it's not something you and I would ever say to do. Just like I wouldn't want to be 100% dependent on even a Shopify site necessarily, unless I have some external resources like my own email list. I don't ever want to see people who are building a giant business and then having someone else have the keys to the kingdom, right? Etsy shuts you down for whatever reason. That then immediately goes away. That's a terrifying prospect. It sounds like she went the exact opposite direction.
Yep.
Not knowing that Shopify can also shut you down potentially, right? But keeping that in mind, that is, a little bit safer ground to start with. But I'd like to see a little bit of diversity. I think the key here, though, is, and you and I are both big advocates of this, Etsy's a great place to get started because you don't have to learn all of the marketing lessons. Once you have loyal customers, you have an email list, you have some of those kinds of things, you can make a move like she did, if that's what you choose to do, or if Etsy forces you into that situation.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's listen to why she decided to close.
It started off really smooth in the very beginning. I was getting sales here and there and getting sales on my website. It's a low cost start. You just have like the 60-cent fee. I didn't mind paying the extra money to get the sales over there. I had a went viral on Etsy for about 2 weeks where I was getting multiple sales a day, sometimes 10 to 12 sales in one day. That was probably a year into having Etsy. So I was already an established seller. I don't remember how many sales I had at the moment, but it was enough to know that I wasn't a fake Etsy account or that I wasn't a scammer. I had almost 5 stars, no complaints, and they decided to put a hold on my funds, which is something that they are allowed to do. However, when I was getting started, I did not know that that was something that they could do. I also never would have expected that they would put a hold on someone's account that's been selling for over a year. This is a huge deal because a lot of people who are selling their handmade goods need those funds in order to purchase the materials to make the product that the other people are buying.
Yeah. Well, okay, Chris, and I know you wanted to strike a point there. I don't think the holding of the funds should be an issue for a business. Like, you have a credit card, you could probably just charge the stuff and then pay it in 30 days. They're not going to hold usually longer than 30 days, at least that I'm aware of. Chris, what did you have on that?
Yeah, so she pointed something out here, Scott, that I think is really interesting for Etsy sellers. She said, I didn't think they would do it for people who were over a year old. One of the flags that they put into their system last year was that they said, basically, if there's a huge spike in sales, and she mentioned I think she said she had a ring that went viral for like 2 or 3 weeks. If they see, okay, Scott, you're selling 20 a day, and all of a sudden you go to 200 a day, that's when that triggers that hold. So you can be around for 6 years. And if you have a massive spike in demand, not something that happens every year, right? You're doing 20% more than last year, but you go from 2 to 200 a day. Etsy goes, whoa, there's something going on here. And they're doing that as a little bit of CYA for themselves. And they're doing that as a little bit of CYA for the customers, right? And we have to understand that that is a possibility. If you find yourselves in that situation, and it's not just handmade sellers, right? It can happen to print-on-demand people too. Yes, typically you're going to have lower cost if you are a print-on-demand seller than if you're hand-making rings, right? But that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect those people as well. I think resource number one there would be your credit card. As long as you're delivering the orders, that money is going to come through. Step number two, there are ways of getting funding for orders. And if you're a Shark Tank fan, Scott, I know that you are. That's like one of the things. They're like, oh, do you have purchase orders? Awesome. Well, let me just fund your inventory, right? I'm going to fund the next 1 million orders. There's a lot of organizations. I know 8Fig is one. I don't know what their integration looks like off the top of my head with something like Etsy, but if this ever happens, there are a lot of organizations that are out there that can help you get the funding that you need in the short term. They will take a small percentage, but if you find yourself in that situation where you need that cash, you can definitely get it. There's always going to be resources to get it. So it's inconvenient, but it shouldn't be business ending for most people.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's keep going.
And so I had over $1,000 on hold with Etsy that they would incrementally release like $20, $10. And that went on for about 4 months, which was honestly very, very, very frustrating. There wasn't anything I could do about it. There wasn't anyone that I could reach out to. Thank God that I had the revenue from my website to cover the cost of the goods from those sales. Otherwise, I would have had to reach into my own pocket to purchase the materials for those goods. This is something that I don't think that a lot of people know about, and I don't think that a lot of people would be prepared for it, especially if what you sell cost a lot to produce. Not only could this put you in a really hard financial
Scott, one other thing I wanted to point out here is having your own website is not a solution to that problem.
Right.
Scott, you've used PayPal for things, right? As both a buyer and a seller. Have you ever had PayPal put a hold on your seller funds?
Yeah, I have.
Right. It happens with other payment gateways as well. And so having your own site is not necessarily a solution to that problem. You're less subject to random whims of people, but Stripe can put a hold on your funding. That's who powers Shopify payments, at least they used to. PayPal, right? Any of these payment processors, if they see something they think is weird, it's in their terms of service to put a hold on some or all of those funds. So understanding that this is something that can happen, and understanding that there are resources like 8Fig or some of the other places that will do inventory type lending to small businesses, or just having a credit card with a little bit of a limit on it, that helps keep you safe no matter where you are. Yes, Etsy has started cracking down on this in a big way because it was one of their anti-spam measures that they rolled out last year, but it can happen anywhere. And that's something I think she may not be aware of because it's never happened to her outside of Etsy. And that's where she first experienced it. But I know we've had that happen with PayPal. I know horror stories of people who have had that happen with Stripe and PayPal and other payment processors. So that's something I wanted to point out.
Yeah. I just want to add that, she had said, I didn't want to, go into my own pocket. I understand that. But when you're running and building a business, sometimes that's your startup, right? Like we all had to reach into our own pocket. So I don't think it's as big of a deal, at least at this point, to where I would say I'm pulling off, I'm pulling out. I'm just curious to see what happens here. So let's just keep watching.
Situation, but it could ruin your reputation on Etsy if you're not able to deliver because they're holding your money.
But there's no reason to me, like why would you not be able to still fulfill even though you didn't get paid? And now I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying like you still should be able to create the product. Like it's almost like before you sell the product, I would think you'd have the product, and I don't want to say made, but you'd have the resources to make it. That's how I would look at it. Now I know it's a custom order, handmade, whatever, but I'm feeling a little like, I guess, where she's not being realistic with like how it really is when you're running a business. But let's just keep watching.
Well, I think that's a mistake a lot of entrepreneurs make. Right? Is they assume that cash flow, they should always be running off cash flow. And when you're first getting started, that's when you're most likely to run into this problem. If you've been in business for a few months or a few years, you should be setting aside that product cost. And this is a mistake every time I look at books for an e-commerce business, and I'm not an accountant, but I go, like, where is your product cost? Are you setting that aside? And if the answer is no, and you're operating off of cash flow, that's terrifying. And it might mean, Scott, that you have to spend another few months at your 9 to 5 or doing whatever it is that you do before you go full time in this side hustle. But if you can build up a little bit of that war chest for inventory, again, doesn't necessarily apply when you're first getting started, but that's what a credit card might be, right? If you find yourself in a situation where your sales blew up, like she potentially did, that's when we need to look at those other funding sources, right? And it's about being resourceful and trying to figure out where we can get that capital from in order to make those decisions. Again, this is a very frustrating thing. And anytime somebody wants to hold some of your money, it's extremely frustrating, but we can plan for this. And it's a mistake that I see a lot of businesses make. And we're guilty of this as well sometimes. So it's not to say that we're better than anybody else, but it is something that's at least to some extent preventable and plannable.
Yeah, for sure.
With Etsy, once that happened, honestly, my mentality around it was never the same. I knew from the very beginning that I didn't want to ever rely on Etsy to produce my sales. And from the very beginning, it's never surpassed the sales that I was able to get from my own website. I do want to make a video about how to get sales from social media and marketing and all those things, because it is absolutely possible to drive your own sales and not rely on someone like Etsy. So if you feel like you need to start on Etsy, please start a website first so that you don't have to be fully reliant on them, because you have zero control over your money. And
so here's where I'm going to say I would be different. It's like for someone to start a website, there's so much involved in a website to get started that you could quit before you actually get started, because you're going to, yes, Shopify makes it easy, but there's still so much more work that goes into that. And that's why I'm a big fan of using a platform to launch the business. And we've done that before where we talk about Etsy as being your launch platform. But if there was one thing I would say, build your email list. That's a lot easier. Let's build the email list. And then if this did happen, then you could quick whip up a Shopify store, even if it was a basic, and then drive people there or to another platform, So I would say the email list would be, yes, I would say if you can from day one, start building your email list, not necessarily like you have to build a website. So I would say that's where I would differ on that.
They can take it away at any moment, and that's not safe for any business owner. My second strike with Etsy, and honestly the last one, I was not going to give them a third. After 3 years of being a seller on Etsy and having 166 sales, great reviews, they suspended my account. It had something to do with my social, and when I moved from the UK to the States, I had to change on Etsy the country that I was in, which was fine. Whenever I updated my address, it wanted me to update my social security information in there, and I did that immediately. So I uploaded a picture of my passport, my name, my social, which they already had my social, and they still suspended my account. I had a banner notification saying, upload a copy of my driver's license and verify my social security number, and I would have an updated email within 10 days. About 3 months later, I still never had an updated email. I have my social security card. I know my social security number by heart. And no matter what I did, I could not get it unsuspended. A huge downside to Etsy is that their customer service is garbage. Everyone that I've spoken to when I've managed to get in contact with a human has always been very kind, and that's great and all, but their ability to actually help you is slim to none. When I reached out to them about my account being suspended and let them know that my social security number is correct in there, they were completely perplexed. They had no clue what was going on, why it wasn't working. And so I had spoken to the person, and then they told me that they would look into the matter further and reach out via email with what they found. A few days later, I did get an email from someone at Etsy support, and they told me they weren't sure what was going on to try and add my middle name, add my middle initial, which
I just want to let people know I'm not laughing at her. I'm laughing that Etsy is this like unorganized, unaware, like that's really what I'm laughing at. So I just want to let you guys know. I feel her pain.
I'm laughing for a similar and different reason. I'm laughing because I just had this same exact experience, but with Amazon, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily an Etsy specific thing. It wasn't my social. In this case, it was the business information and the EIN. And if you guys aren't aware that, it's essentially a business's social security number, right? It's the way that they identify it on the government documents. And Amazon had some new requirements because of some of the federal laws that had changed. You had to go in and update it. They mailed a postcard and you had to type in the number. That got done 9 months ago, right? Nothing in the dashboard, nothing. I get an email saying your account has been suspended for failure to update the information. I went through the same rigmarole, right? Amazon's a little bit better about getting you in contact with a human being. Scott, I got somebody on the phone. I said, my account is suspended. Can you tell me why? And he went, your account's not suspended. I said, yeah, it is. Like, here's the screenshot. Here's everything. He goes, oh yeah, it doesn't show suspended on the back end at all. So same exact situation. They said, hey, you didn't update your information. I don't know why your account is suspended because it's not showing. Oh yeah. In this one weird place, it's showing as suspended, but it also says you have all of the correct information, right? So this can happen anywhere. And I'm only laughing because it happened to me literally 3 weeks ago on a different platform. And they're like, we have all your information. It all matches with what's on our record. You typed in the stupid pin that we mailed you. And yeah, we don't know. So it'll probably be a little while. And 2, 3, 4 days later, they finally got back to me and said, we think we got your account back, but it might happen again. So that, it
Crazy.
got resolved in our case, but the same thing, something weird was stuck in the system. Again, not necessarily an Etsy specific thing, something that can happen pretty much anywhere because they do have some requirements for information. But when you pile that on to holding her funds, I understand where you start to have that build up frustration, especially with Etsy.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to listen to a little bit more. We probably won't listen to the entire thing. I'll link it up in the description so you guys can watch the entire thing if you want to. You can comment to her, like whatever you want to do. But I will say the big lesson here should be, yes, we do not want to depend on a platform. Our platform's going to have weird stuff happen like this here. Yes. What should you be doing? Building a website from scratch at first? I wouldn't personally do that. I personally would start the email list. If you are interested in building an email list and you want to know how, we actually put together a guide. It's our email list building playbook. We'll go ahead and, if you want a copy of that, just put email in the comments and then we'll go ahead and make sure that you get a copy of that. Just put email in the comments and we'll make sure that you get a copy of that, because I've had so many people say, I wish I would have known about building the email list sooner. And I've actually said that in other businesses that I've had. That's why I've learned my lesson. That would be the easiest way to build an additional channel, because that is a channel that you have control over. So I would say definitely make sure that you make that a priority. Let's listen in a little bit more here and see if she has anything else. But we pretty much realized she's fed up. She's frustrated because they closed her account down or suspended her account again. And this time it had to do with identity and she doesn't know why. And they didn't know why.
I did all of those things. I tried every variation of my name. And if those things didn't work, then I would need to reach out to the Social Security Administration, which makes zero sense. Imagine I reach out to the Social Security Administration and say, hey, my Etsy account won't verify my Social Security number. Is something wrong? Not only would I not get a response for something like that, but they would probably laugh at how dumb that question is. Even when I was in England, my Social Security number was verified on Etsy. So it was clear to me that this was something on their end that they just didn't want to dig further into. It was either a technical glitch or whatever, but it was very clear that I was not going to get any support from them. And so I decided to leave Etsy. It is terrifying to me that some people have built their entire livelihood on this platform that has so little control into helping their makers and sellers. Not only is their customer service completely limited, hard to reach, but they honestly do not advocate for their sellers on their platform. The platform is meant to be for handmade goods, handmade gifts, handmade crafts, and they've completely allowed their platform to be overrun by cheap Chinese-made products that have been ripping off people's designs. I've seen so many small creators that have had their designs, pictures, everything stolen by these companies that are mass-producing products with silver-plated jewelry or fake gold, and they don't do anything about it.
Okay, so yeah. So I agree with what she's saying there is like, there's a lot of copycats. Etsy has allowed the making of cheap products that aren't handmade. I get her side of it because she is 100% handmade, but I also look at it, Etsy's side is that they are trying to allow their customers to have a wider selection, because they noticed that they weren't going to be able to survive as a company if all they did was rely on handmade. So I understand her frustration with that, but I do think Etsy made a good move as to allowing these other products. Now, what I will say is they do not do a good job of regulating and kind of seeing what is knockoffs, what is being trademark violations, like all the Disney products, the Taylor Swift products, like all of the trademark stuff that they're not enforcing. That I see as a big, big problem. And I agree with her. So I totally agree with her frustration and for her being a handmade seller and for her building her own website and learning the marketing side of things. Like to me, that's a more advanced e-commerce business. Like to start there can be intimidating for a lot of people. But that's her choice on what she wants to do. And hey, kudos to her for doing that. I still think Etsy is a great platform. I think it's a great platform to get started on because it takes all of that learning curve of an e-commerce business out of the mix and really just understanding what people are searching for on a platform, how to deliver something that they are looking for. It helps you with learning business at a slower level or a slower pace. But should you have your own e-commerce store? That's up to you. Should you have your own email list? Absolutely 100%. Because if this had happened to her and she wasn't technically shut down, she was suspended. So we don't know how long that could have lasted. But if this did happen, she could have then just taken her email list and let them know, hey, having an issue with Etsy, but here's all my stuff over here. And then you can continually drive traffic over to your new entity. So Chris, any last words or comments on her situation or anyone else that's maybe experiencing this or thinking about leaving the platform?
No, I don't think she's actually wrong on any of the reasons that she's upset, right? Like any of the reasons that she shut down, I totally get, right? Scott, it's the stuff you and I have been screaming about on live streams for the past few months. Basically since the mock-up apocalypse last fall, we've been screaming about a lot of those things, like the ability to get in contact with a real human being, some of those kinds of things. And I understand, especially if you're in the situation that it sounds like she's in, where she said, look, it's just not worth my time. I'm making more on my own website anyway. Cool. The caution that I would have for people selling on Etsy is that selling on your own website is a very different set of skills, right? You might have to call Liam Neeson, who knows? But it's one of those things where if you have an e-commerce or a marketing background, you can get away with doing that a little bit sooner. If you're more on the artistic side, or you haven't launched and run your own business, you're not familiar with how to drive traffic, you're not familiar with all of those kinds of things, then you probably don't want to start there. You want to start with, for lack of a better term, Scott, some training wheels, right? You want to have somebody who's going to be driving a lot of that traffic for you. That's where a platform like Etsy comes in really handy. They let you focus on the startup portion of the business, which is really defining your niche, getting those first sales under your belt, and figuring out what will sell to your audience without you having to do that and master Facebook ads and figure out how to set up a Google AdWords account and figure out your email list all at the same time. If that's a situation you find yourself in, I would give the opposite advice and say, start on Etsy, start where the traffic is. And then when you feel like you have a little bit of your feet under you, don't ever become dependent on Etsy, Amazon, Shopify. Don't be dependent on a single platform or a single channel. But once you have those feet under you, then figure out how to do all of the website setup stuff, figure out the ad side of things, figure all those other things out. Once you have some revenue coming in and you have a little bit of a foundation built.
I'll end with understand that yes, on Etsy, you're building on someone else's platform, but it's a great place to tap into all of the traffic that they are creating and that they are advertising to get people to the platform. And then it's our job to build our customer base and build our real e-commerce business from the efforts of starting on Etsy.